Welcome, everyone, to Music Junkies, a podcast about people sharing extraordinary stories about how music has impacted their lives.
Welcome, everyone, to Music Junkies. I am your host, Annette Smith, and we have an amazing, you look super hot today, right? I love that.
I dressed up just for my Zoom meeting. I'm not wearing pants, though, so as long as I don't stand up, we're good.
Well, I might want you to stand up, so that might be fun for the audience to see.
But I'm going to think of the children. No one needs to see that.
We have an awesome guest today, Jack Panic. You know, you are a Canadian musician, which is really awesome. Songwriter, actor, producer. You know, you've worked on a lot of different places, and you've also assisted the Juno Awards. I think that your bio is just like amazing. You did so many different things, and it was so fun just going and looking you up and watching your videos and checking out your really cool podcasts and doing all of that stuff. I love it. So thank you for joining us today. It's awesome.
No problemo. Happy to be here.
Love it. So before we get started, I always like to ask, what was your experience putting your playlist together today?
It was a little weird because I had to hunt through a lot of Spotify songs, and I forget how much music I listened to find something that was 10 songs is interesting. I mean, if you said 10,000 songs, I could put that together, no problem. But to whittle it down to 10, yeah, that's a challenge.
I know it's hard to do because I feel like you go down a rabbit hole every single time that you click on one song. You're like, oh, but that song leads to that song, and that song leads to that song. So I love that you're able to come up with exactly 10. It's very rare that people come up with exactly 10. Usually people are like, here's 30. Pick which ones you like.
Yeah. Oh, it could have very easily slipped into that world. It's like, what are we doing?
So we're going to get started on your first song. Are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. Some Johnny B Goode. I love it.
Classic.
It is a classic. Why do you love that song?
That's a ripping tune. I mean, it doesn't matter what year you were born. That is a rock and roll through and through. I don't know. Chuck Berry's phenomenal. I mean, as a human being, he's had his share of controversies, but as a pioneer of the rock and roll world, you can't blow your nose at the man. You know, he's right up there with all of the greats, and I think that was one of the first songs that really started to shift the world of rock and roll from, you know, sort of an offshoot of kind of the jazz and blues world into more of a theatrical, I don't know what you want to call it, more popular form of music. Because Chuck Berry, just like Little Richard, they were kind of pioneers of the showmanship aspect of rock and roll, right? So I think that was a big draw, and it was one of the songs that made me want to pick up a guitar. Listening to that, it was eye-opening, right?
I love it. So did you start with bass first and then move to guitar, or?
I started with piano, actually.
Oh, okay.
But guitar is my primary instrument. Bass, by effect, I think a lot of guitar players can play bass. Not to shit on the bass players too much, but no, guitar was my main instrument, and that's what I learned on and cut my teeth on. And then, you know, bass kind of came around. I found that oftentimes when I was writing songs, I would flip back and forth between starting a song on a guitar, a bass, or a piano. And it's just one of those things that it's nice to have in your arsenal of tools.
Yeah. When did you start playing piano?
Good question. I was probably 8 years old.
Okay.
Maybe 9 years old. That was something my parents wanted me to pursue, and I hated it. Horrible. You know, I wanted to play guitar desperately, but that was not what was in the cards for them. So it was years before I was able to start learning by myself on a acoustic guitar, and that sort of snowballed from there.
What was one of the first bands that you started learning on acoustic guitar?
I don't think it was anything in particular. I think a lot of the traditional rock and roll stuff, funny enough, like Chuck Berry, that was something that I thought was simple. Turns out it's not, but
We think it is.
yeah, it sounds simple until you start getting into it and you realize, wow, this is it's pretty tough stuff. But that was the kind of stuff I wanted to play, and I think naturally it devolves into punk music because most guitar players of that age don't play very well. So naturally, you start to gravitate towards the more simple songs, and yeah, it sort of went from there.
I love it. So you're a former bassist at Sparrows. So what happened there? Did
Mhm.
you start the band? Did a bunch of friends get
No.
together? How did that all start?
I'd actually never met the band before. The label they were with, Dynalone Records, or New Damage Records, which is a sub-label of Dynalone Records. When they had signed to that label, I guess they had a different lineup that they'd had for. They'd gone through a lot of musicians since they'd started in Ottawa and sort of moved all the way up to or down to Toronto. I was connected with them once they had been around Toronto for a while, and I'm not sure what had happened with their previous bass player. They'd had a number of different musicians kind of go through, but they were looking for someone, and we started chatting and did a couple auditions, and next thing you know, we're in the band and
Yeah.
toured with them for a number of years. I think the first full year I was with the band, uh, it was sort of just a hired gun, kind of hidden away, wasn't really marketed or promoted. And then I think I was officially announced as a member once the new album was set to release. That was Failed Gods. Can't remember specific. I think it was 2019 of some specific time frame. But yeah, and then did another year with them. There were some tensions in that band, and I think it's tough being in a group for so long, especially like those guys. And as is the way with a lot of bands, I think as people grow up, you have to start making decisions about whether or not you want to continue schlepping it in a van or a bus all across the world, or if you want to settle down and start a family. And I know a couple of the guys in the group wanted to do that, and they've. I'm not sure what the status of the band is. I haven't spoken to them for a while, a long time, but I know that they had started to try and do a new project, but I don't know.
Sounds like there
a
might
good
have been a
time.
dick in the band, right? Was there a couple dicks in the band?
There's always. I mean, it's four guys. There's a lot of dicks in that band to begin with, but no, it's just something I think happens as you age. You start to, if you think about that band, I think they'd been around for years before I joined, but I know that when you start a band, like I started my band when I was 16, and you grow up to when you're in your mid 30s, you realize that the way that you felt when you started something, like you think about, your journals or whatever when you were 16, and if you read back and look at them and how cringy they were, it's kind of the same idea as a musician. So if you started something so long ago and you've created a specific style and a specific feeling with that type of music, and then you've grown up with it over so long, it's tough to justify continuing it in that form because a lot of the time you've changed as a person. It's like Blink 182, they're singing about being teenagers, and they're well into their late 40s, early 50s.
I don't know if that's creepy or what you want to do, but that's just how
a
you
good
sell
example,
records.
Yeah.
Right. Next song. Boom, boom.
That's John Lee Hooker. He's a phenomenal artist. Was a phenomenal artist. Something about him a lot of folks don't know is back in that era, there was a lot of segregation. Music was incredibly tough to be in as an artist, and especially as a Black artist. So a lot of folks from that era found that they were exploited pretty regularly. Record deals were different back in that time, and a lot of artists who were new, especially artists who were Black, would get signed to deals they would record an album. The album might be a hit, and they would oftentimes see little to no money from the sales of their music. The problem was, when you sign a record contract, your name is often part of that, especially if you're a solo artist. So for someone like John Lee Hooker, he was contractually bound to use a specific name with a specific label. So he actually had come up with an interesting way of circumventing that by changing his artist name a lot. So there's no hard facts, but there's speculation that there's around 20 different pseudonym type John Lee Hooker records out there, from him going to new labels, changing his name, recording an album, getting the advance, and just flipping constantly between record labels like that, sort of screwing the system that was screwing him. And
That's
I
right.
think that's incredibly noble, and it was something that really, I think, developed his sound, because he was one of those guys that could grab just one guitar and him, sit in front of a microphone, and crank out an entire record in an hour. And it's incredible to think about in today's terms, but for him, that's really cool. So he's just one of those people I respect a lot for the amount of work that he put into during an era where the world's against you, and he was able to flourish in it. And then years later, I saw him in the Blues Brothers movie. He made a little cameo on in the first Blues Brothers movie as a street musician, and I thought that was a really excellent way to honor the man who'd spent his whole life grinding, and there he was.
I love it. I love it. So you left Sparrows, and then you moved on and became a guitarist for another band. Are you with that? Are you with?
Actually,
sorry,
yes. Sparrows was a band that I joined. I actually started my own band when I was 16. I'd only been with Sparrows for a couple of years. My other band, Saying Yesterday, I've been with for 10, 11 years. I don't know. I can't remember. We started in 2009, I think. So that was the first band that I'd started when I was in high school. And it was punky, because that's what we could play. And yeah, we didn't really know what we were doing. We had a lot of fun, but very shortly after I started that band, we started performing shows, and it starts with the basement shows, and then the community halls, and then it starts getting bigger, and suddenly we were playing concert venues, and I guess we got the attention of some folks who liked what we were doing. And this was the end of the early 2000s, right? Just going into the 2010s, and I think the whole music industry was changing a lot, so it was weird to see a young band starting out that was able to draw crowds. I think that was a big attraction for whatever AR person saw us. So we got asked about doing a tour with a bigger band, and that sort of set us off on the path that I at the time did music because I enjoyed it, but I think that was around the time that I decided, hey, I kind of want to do this for a job. Like, you mean you're going to pay me to play and have fun and be silly? Great.
That's right. Where'd the name come from?
Saint Yesterday. I don't know. I think we wrote down a bunch of crap that sounded cool, and
like most bands.
Yeah, that was something that kind of came about. I don't know. I wish it had a specific deep meaning, but I think it was just something that seemed to fit. Do
you have any outrageous story? Story? That's okay. Hey, some people have this elaborate background from their band name, and like they all like came together, and
Yep.
I think it's, I don't think it always has to be like that. Sometimes it's just a click and you're like, no, I like this name. I don't know why. This is what it's going to be.
Yeah, that's sort of what it was.
Do you have any crazy stories from being on tour? Anything crazy that happened to maybe one of your bandmates while you guys were playing?
Oh my God. Yeah, I suppose. I'm just going to take a second, try and formulate this in my head, because I know we were young, and I'm sure a lot of what we were doing was definitely against the law for that age group. The Saint Yesterday stuff was all riot, because in those early days, we got paid a stupid amount of money for being young kids, and none of us had any concept of how to save that money. It was just you got paid at the end of the show, and then you immediately went and blew it all on drugs and alcohol, and then you were broke by the next morning. And I think it was a weird time where I was I'd been kicked out of my house. I wasn't living at home, so I was kind of floating around. I found that it was often better to just try and find a party that constantly went on instead of trying to like find somewhere to sleep that particular night. So oftentimes, um, the parties that we would have would last, 2, 3, 4 days. And yes, it was quite a challenge. I think one particular story from that era was we were the band Die Mannequin, and at the time we were just the local opener. We were supporting the band on their tour, but we weren't anybody. And the band had their own spectacular dressing room and all the amenities, and we just had like the side stage, like, here, just tuck your junk there and stay out of the way. But being the fun loving individual I am, I was looking for somewhere to use the loo, and wandered into the dressing room of the band. And they hadn't arrived yet, so the security guy was like, yeah, go in, you can use the bathroom. So great. The band shows up, and I just emerged from the bathroom, and they're like, who the hell are you? I was like, oh, I'm Jack. Who the hell are you? And I think we hit it off. We started joking around, and next thing you know, we're partying in the dressing room before the show. Now, I didn't realize, but my band was looking for me because we were gearing up to go on, and I'd disappeared. So at this point, the promoter was a really nice guy. He'd gone out to get party supplies for the band and the rider requirements. So at that point, he'd come back into the room holding just armfuls of beer and various libations. And I remember he'd open the door to the dressing room, and I'm sitting there half dressed with the band, and the party kind of stopped, and he said, what the hell are you doing in here? You can't be in here. And the band looked at the promoter, and they're like, he's allowed in here. What the hell are you doing in here? He's like, oh, I brought beer. They're like, oh, great. Took the beer from him, kicked him out of the dressing room. And then I think around that time, my band had determined where I was, and I was rushed to the stage to perform in a real loose state, we'll say. But it was the start of a great tour, and I think it really set the stage for what fun you can have being a musician, because there's not a lot to do. Everyone thinks backstage is really exciting until you're there. You realize it kind of sucks. A lot of sitting around and waiting. So you can do things to entertain yourself and enjoy your time. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and it's a good way to kill time, right? Drinking and having fun. What else? Like you said, if it's boring backstage, you don't want to get too loser pissed on stage.
Yeah, Sparrows was always dead sober. The singer was sober, a vegan, so it was very very different experience touring with them. But Saint Yesterday has always been a little looser, and I think there's a fine line between, you got to be professional. You're being paid to entertain people, and you got to maintain your coherency. You don't want to end up a mess, because I know if I paid for a concert and someone was just pissed, it pisses me off, right?
Yeah,
you
for
feel
sure.
like you wasted your money. But at the same time, I find that those shows where they kind of go off the rails a little bit are more fun. It's more human, and it's exciting for the crowd. There's a lot of there were a lot of great venues in my city in Toronto where things would get just ridiculous. Booze being poured off the stage into the mouths of crowds, and beer fountains, and all kinds of just silliness that can only really happen at a live concert in those settings. So I think that's something that a lot of artists, I don't know.
And if you're touring, I think as a fan, you're like, okay, if I've seen them and they're doing the same type of stage show, same songs, it's cool to see them do something different. Oh my God, this guy was trash. He lit his bass on fire, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever. Oh, we didn't do that at our show. Cool. I'm the only one that got to see that. That's exciting.
It is, and it's more fun. I mean, like I said, it's a fine line. You got to make sure that you can have the fun, but you don't compromise the integrity of the show. And I know I've gone overboard a few times
I know.
inadvertently,
I'm
but
excited to hear some Jack stories soon. All right, next song. It's a great band, White Stripes. Great song. Dead Leaves.
so that was yeah, the White Stripes. I couldn't really hear it on my end, but I
Oh,
know
sorry.
I know the tone of that guitar anywhere.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
crazy.
I had the pleasure of visiting Third Man Records in Detroit while on tour, and it's a phenomenal place. If you're ever in Detroit and you like music, go check out Jack White's Third Man Records. Um, they sell obviously vinyl, and they also press and cut their own vinyl in the back.
Oh, wow.
So they have a fully functional record plant, and they produce all their stuff. So if you go on the Third Man website, you can order vinyl that they've made in that factory, and it all is like traditional vintage equipment. It's really cool stuff. But um, predating that, when Jack was in the White Stripes, when I was learning how to play the guitar, their music was, I think, that next logical step between learning the blues and the rock and roll and learning more modern electric guitar kind of stuff, really heavy
Yeah.
fuzz pedals and gain. And that attracted me a lot because every kid, who's learning to play the electric guitar, I think at some point or another is going to play something like Seven Nation Army or Smoke on the Water, the classic learning to play
Yeah.
guitar songs. But with the White Stripes, I found that because Jack White used a lot of the blues influences that I was listening to, it made sort of a light bulb moment for me. I went, hey, I know that sound, that riff, that came from Muddy Waters, or that came from Sun House, or that was a John Lee Hooker riff. And it was really helpful when I was learning to make those connections. It's like I said, the light bulb moment where you go, hey, I get it. I get it. So his music, even his solo stuff that he's been doing recently, I think is really still rooted in that traditional kind of rock and roll
Yeah.
sound, but with his own modern twist. So that was something that I've always liked. I mean, I'd love to see the White Stripes if they ever reunited. Meg White sort of disappeared from public eye. I don't know what she's up to, but she was always a really, really awesome, fun drummer. I don't think she was the best drummer in the world, but I think she was perfect at what she did, and definitely underrated.
Yeah,
Definitely
I
underrated.
agree. I thought, and I'm a drummer and I agree. Like, she is awesome.
Yeah.
And it's just so cool. I don't see a lot of female drummers. So it's
No,
pretty cool.
there's tons of female musicians I know that are great, but um, as far as female drummers, I think I don't know if there's a stigma associated with it. If I'm not sure why it's not something people gravitate towards, because I know that like drums are phenomenal. They're great to play. Anyone who's like hammered on a drum set knows that this is the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
But I've been lucky enough to meet a number of great female drummers. One from a band, Courage My Love, twin sisters, Mercedes and Phoenix. Phoenix plays the drums in that band, and she's phenomenal. There's a band in our area here, Toronto, called the Anti Queens. They're punky rock and roll, all girl. They've had female drummers right through, but it's not to tie it to a gender specific thing. I just think that it's one of those instruments that people knock before they try it. I think they get overwhelmed looking at a drum kit and think, "Oh, I could never play that." But if you can snap your fingers in time, I think you can play the drums.
That's right. So did you guys have a lot of groupies in the band?
I'm sure I did. Not so much Sparrows. Sparrows was very, very tame. The Saint Yesterday world was a little silly at times. Back in the early days of that band, we had a different singer and him and I would get up to all kinds of shenanigans. Now my friend Dan, who's singing with us, yeah, I mean it gets a little interesting at times, and I've been blessed enough not to have any like tour babies floating around, so I think I've been pretty lucky.
That's good.
But
So
yeah,
you have the most groupies out of the band though? Would they say that?
probably, yeah. I think that's a landslide, yes.
Okay. Any
Nowadays,
stalkers?
not so much.
Any
Yeah,
crazy
I did.
stalkers? Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. I
and
mean,
how was that?
this got weird, uncomfortable. I know guys don't see it too much, and girls get
Yeah.
all kinds of wonderful stuff all the time from weird people online messaging them and catcalling them, and like guys don't get to experience that too much. But never have I ever felt a more chilling feeling than realizing that this person is not just stalking you and your social profiles, but the people you associate with. I kept seeing this person pop up with friends or acquaintances that I'd met or ex-girlfriends. I would see them suddenly start to pop up, and it was really uncomfortable.
Did she ever come and
say the
talk to
least.
you though? Or was it just like
Oh
look
yeah,
from afar?
plenty of times. But you know, I'm polite and I'll happily chat to anyone. There's
Yeah.
no issue with that. It's more when strange narratives start getting built to like, oh, we're together. You know, we're best friends. We talk all the time, and something as simple as a passing hello suddenly gets this big story behind it. And it's just like I said, it felt very chilling, to
Mm.
say the least, to have that sort of experience, and not something I'd recommend for anyone. So I think
Did you
nowadays
sleep with
social
her?
media. At one point, yes, but
Oh,
you know, I think the golden rule that everyone needs to, or every male should respect, is never
don't sleep
put
with your
your
stalkers.
yeah. Just I what in my defense, I didn't know that was going to go that way at that time,
Yeah.
but I also don't think I was thinking with the right head anyway. So what can you do?
What can you do? I think it's
Live and learn.
important that every artist has a stalker for at least once in their career.
Just to get the merit badge to put on your
That's right.
sash.
That's right. Hey, it could lead to so much more, right? At least she's promoting you.
Yeah, I don't know what she's up to these days, but I hope she's well, and I'm sure she's found something else to infatuate herself with.
All right, next song. Green Day, Welcome to Paradise. Great album, great band.
Yeah. So that was everyone remembers that song from the Dookie album. It actually appeared earlier on the I think Kerplunk album, or if I'm mixing my albums up, I'm sure it was actually, yeah, the album before Dookie. They had already recorded and released that song, but it didn't. I don't know why they re-released it. I guess maybe they just thought it needed to be heard again. Maybe it didn't get enough recognition the first time around, so they re-released it on Dookie, and that became just a really rockin' tune. I don't know. I like Green Day. They're one of my favorite bands. They've always put on an entertaining show, and I know it's scary to me that just recently, I think now 2 years ago, it was the 25th anniversary of Dookie, and then just this year or last year, it was the 25th anniversary of Insomniac, the album after that. It's crazy seeing all these albums suddenly,
I know.
turn old enough to drink, and it's great. I mean, I think it's still a timeless album. I think American Idiot, Dookie, they're right up there with the White Blood Cells and Elephant albums from the White Stripes. It's just something that's, I think, really embedded into the 1990s, 2000s musical lexicon.
So I feel like you've been to a lot of concerts. What was one of your favorite concerts you ever been to?
Ooh. I mean, again, I love Green Day. They're always an entertaining show. I think one of the better, like if we're talking big AAA concerts, I had the pleasure of watching the Foo Fighters
Oh
perform in
yeah.
Toronto right after it was their first tour back after Dave Grohl broke his leg, falling
Wow.
off a stage in Norway or Sweden. And he took off 2 weeks. He came back with a giant robotic chair with his leg up that shot fireworks and could drive around the stage.
That's
And
cool.
the man rocked out incredibly hard. I mean, unbelievably so for a guy who's got his leg up in a chair. And that I think was just given the circumstances why that made it one of the most memorable shows I've been to for sure.
Yeah. No, they're incredible. Like like his presence on stage is, yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
One of my favorites is your next song. So this. Oh
yeah.
It's like one of my all-time favorite bands in the world. I've probably seen them 20 times.
Yeah. As soon as you hear that riff, it's like,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
I love Motley
here we
Crue.
go.
It's my favorite.
Yeah.
That's probably why I picked up the drums, was because Tommy Lee. I just love the whole how he played, and just, yeah, I was like, one day I'm gonna play like that. It hasn't happened yet, but
And I think with them, something I personally like, I think with a lot of artists, something I really gravitate towards is they're authentic as people. Like every artist puts on a bit of a show when you go on stage. Like you got your stage self and then you got your off the stage self. But I think a lot of these people, music's a very small community. I've had the pleasure of crossing paths with a lot of awesome folks, and the people I find that I like often are ones who are almost the same as they are on stage as they are off stage. Motley Crue is that type of group. Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee, Vince Neil, they're genuine people, and of course Mick Mars. They're not really putting it on as much as people would think. I have a friend of mine had the pleasure of hanging out with Tommy Lee at his place, I think last summer, and said, he was the coolest, most easygoing guy in the world. And even though I think when they'd arrived there, he was in bed, when Tommy woke up finally and kind of made his way out to the patio, there's just a new face sitting in his yard, and he was just like, "Oh, hey, man." And I think that speaks volumes to the type of person he is, where it's not an act of being cool, like he's genuinely cool.
yeah.
And I had a run-in with a gentleman named DJ Ashba, who plays in Nikki Sixx's 6 a.m. band. So we were in California together, and the same thing. I mean, genuine, awesome individual. And I think when it comes to bands that have had that kind of longevity, I think the only reason they've been around and been in a group, like I said, with bands, is if you're creating something real and you're not, you're changing your style as you age and you grow up, but you're not being inauthentic at any point, you can last forever as a band. Green Day started when they were 16 teenagers in high school, and Motley Crue, same thing. They were a bunch of young guys in LA and said, "Hey, we want to start a band and we want to do it our way." And they're still around.
That's right.
Who would have thunk?
I know, it's crazy. I'm just reading Nikki Sixx's new books right now, and it's funny. I don't know if you've read it, but it's pretty cool. In the very beginning of the book, he talks about they're getting, all in shape, and he's like doing all this stuff and eating healthy, and they're all doing it, and they're going to counseling, and they're doing all this stuff ready for the tour. And I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks before tour was going to start and COVID hit. Right. So it's just so crazy, the amount of stuff that they do to prepare, and obviously they have love for each other. They keep on coming back and taking more beatings from each other. And that's what makes a really cool band. Right.
Yep.
Love
I
that.
agree.
So are you single, Jack? Or are you in a relationship?
I am in a relationship. I think I've been perpetually in a relationship since 2009.
Oh, what does that mean?
I very rarely am single. I don't know. I like being around people, and it's always nice to have someone with you. The only thing I find challenging is it's always difficult to be in a relationship when you travel. Anyone who does a job where you travel a lot, it can make
Yeah.
it really rough. Um, I don't have really a lot of family, so that's not an issue. But I know that unless you're in that world also traveling, it's tough to comprehend what it's like. Where, if I said to you, hey, I'm going to go take off to, I don't know, the States for 5 months, it doesn't make for a great relationship, right? And
Yeah.
it's always a tricky, again, you're walking the razor's edge of, is this something that's going to work? And I think you see it a lot. Musicians in general, I find, have a not great history with being able to maintain relationships. But for the most part, I've had a lot of folks who I think can put up with it for a while.
It's good. I think
So
it'd be
it's nice.
hard. I think honestly, if I was a musician, I probably wouldn't want to be in a relationship. At least in the
Again,
first 2 years of my career. Like if I,
Yep.
the basement thing, and then I was doing this big concert thing, and I was, I'd want to
But it's
play
also
around a little bit.
it's something that's fun for a while, but I found that I got really burned out, and I think personally it's a different era now than it was even when I was younger, and even in the early 2000s. It was a different era, and nowadays we've got a lot more social change and a lot more of the, I don't know, I don't want to say censored type of living we have, but with the emergence of the cancel culture stuff, it's a different world to be sort of a rock and roller. It's a different world to be an entertainer. It's not the 80s anymore, right? You can't act without having
consequences.
Your sort of, well, I mean, consequences in general, they go without saying, but it's not as much of a free-for-all. You look at like what was her name, Laurie Maddox, the famous groupie who'd slept with everyone, wrote a book, was famous, and this is a girl who'd been with Bowie and Mick Jagger and what was it?
It's a book called
Jimmy
I'm
Page.
with the Band. Is that the book? Yeah.
And that was something where I think there was a certain pride behind it. And I know that even when I was younger and starting the performance kind of world and the touring world, it felt different. It wasn't the same kind of feeling you get now, where if you perform and people like you always feel a little defensive of like, I don't really want to hang out and go and get drinks after the show with you guys. I just, it's not like you're gonna take anyone back to your hotel room. It's a different era, and it's a shame, I think, in a sense that the performance world and the concert world isn't as much of a call it like a bohemian feeling. It's not so much of that, universal idea. It's more of a, I want to go to the concert to take some Instagram photos and post it online. It's less about going to the concert and experiencing everything, right? For me, I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, going to a concert was always about connecting with the musicians and connecting with the people around me. And I've met some of my best friends at concerts. But again, nowadays, as an entertainer and as someone in the world where you've got to be very careful about how you act and how you react to situations, there's not really any room for that sort of silliness anymore. And
could be videotaped, put on Instagram, right? And cut.
I mean, it's just a different era. We've evolved past it, and I think you see it with any changing of the guards, as it were. It's not so much about sex, drugs, and rock and roll now. Maybe it's a little more about accountability and not that world. But again, I can only speak on my own experiences and what I liked about performing and watching concerts. So I think as time passes, we'll see how things change. But for now, I think it's definitely a bit of a different vibe than it
It's
was, at
very
least
different.
even when I was started.
Yeah. And you can tell that, I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way with you about that. Like, not saying about Motley Crue again, but to come back and be able to open up stadiums, it shows you that people want that type of a concert, right? I hate going to concerts and I'm like, okay, so what's happening? You guys are just going to stand there and that's what we're doing. And then, 10, 15, 30,000 people beside me all have their phones out and videotaping. I'm just like, this is awful. No wonder why you don't want to jump up and down on stage and be crazy. Like, what's the point?
Yeah. Well, I think about in my early days, we were playing a concert hall, and bearing in mind the girl in the audience was a girl I was with at the time, but I was able in the middle of a guitar solo to walk off the stage and go and make out with her in the front row during a solo, and then go back on stage. And it was very rock and roll and very fun. But even nowadays, even with that being the person I was with, I would hesitate to act like that, because I would fear that if someone in the crowd who didn't know the relationship that I had with that person were to videotape it and throw it online, how would that look? And there's no defending yourself once the mob mentality kind of gets you, right? So, given the circumstances, I would definitely check that action before anything like that happened. And yeah, it's as I said, bittersweet in a sense. I feel like it's changed, and it has not necessarily changed in the better from a like total off the wall. Like it's we're not going to see the Van Halen level of debauchery on stage that we used to, but I think nowadays you can create that content a little more curated, and you can still adhere to it. Like, look at Motley Crue, they're still putting on that show, but I think it's a little more, again, curated. It's a little more thought out. It's less unhinged. There's no Jack Daniels liquor chugging on stage anymore. And again, as you grow up, you start to realize that your liver can't handle that.
All right, another phenomenal band. All right, some GNR. Welcome to the jungle. Again.
As soon as you hear that riff, it's going to be a party.
I know.
That's one of my drinking tunes. As soon as it comes on, it's like, oh, here we go. I think in the same strain as Motley Crue, they were a band that I gravitated to because they had a great show.
Yeah.
I've had friends who've had the privilege of hanging out with Slash, and I've again had the privilege of hanging out with DJ Ashba, who for a brief stint before he was in 6 a.m. there was he replaced Slash in Guns N' Roses. So it's always been something that I've been really interested in seeing. And I think that whole 80s kind of rock and roll era was one of the best eras of, rock music that existed, because it was such a big thing. It was a big show. It was big hair. It was big guitars. It was just everything that I wanted to see in a concert was kind of boiled down and refined. And then, grunge kind of came and changed that. But GNR, again, they're a band that had a ridiculous history. If you've read any of the books or watched any of the documentaries, that era of the golden age of the LA Sunset Strip world, it was cowboy land. Anything went. There was guns pulled on promoters. There was fist fights in the middle of shows, a lot of drugs, a lot of sex. And I think we had peaked as a rock and roll society at that point. But, as times change, only the few big bands sort of survive. And I'm glad that Guns N' Roses, I'm actually astounded that Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue both were able to survive that era, because their history dictated that they should not, no, none of them should have been alive,
Yeah,
you know, but
for sure.
here we are, and they've managed to really create a legacy of just awesome music. And I think that's something I'm proud of, at least seeing that these bands are still able to endure and exist in today's musical landscape. Maybe not as hugely popular as they were back in that time, but the fact that they're still around is impressive.
Yeah. So if you could be any guitar player for any band, who would you be? What band would you love to play with? Any era, right? Just think if you're all their same age right now.
To be fair, I don't think I'd have the talent of a lot of the guitar players I'd love to play with. I could maybe fill in as a backup guitar player. No, that's a good question. I think I personally would have loved to have played with Green Day in their heyday, because it was just, you know, my kind of music. And I think the flip side is I'd also have loved to play with, like, I think any of the Sunset Strip LA bands would have been good. And funny enough, a lot of them ended up sharing members, right? Guns N' Roses came from the LA Guns band, right? And yeah, they were just cross-pollinated with members all over the place. Because again, if you're in a like small town, I say small town, like LA is a hamlet or something, but in a musical sense, in a small world like that, you're gonna meet different people and you're gonna change members all the time. So I think I'd pick to definitively have just been part of that LA scene in the 80s, because I mean, I could say I'd love to play with Guns N' Roses, but if I was in that time at that particular moment, I probably would have, you know, probably would have played with them and all the other LA Sunset Strip bands.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
All right, you ready? Another phenomenal band. Some Ozzie. I love Ozzie. I've seen him so many times too. Like, he's so good.
I was set to go see him and Marilyn Manson
yeah, me
a couple
too.
years ago. They were coming to Toronto, and then you know, pandemic stuff, and unfortunately, and now I think Manson's probably going to have trouble ever since the cancel stuff happened, doing any of those tours again.
I know.
But yeah, you can't fault Ozzie for being a legend himself. Anyone who's seen The Dirt, it's a good example of maximum Ozzie in his heyday.
Yeah.
He is definitely a legacy. So much so, actually, that I was reading an article. They'd studied his DNA in the UK to determine why he was still alive. And I think they determined that he had traces of a specific strain of Neanderthal DNA that helped him process alcohol better than other humans. And I thought that was something.
That makes sense.
He yeah, he's a phenomenal musician, and he's got such a legacy. You can't.
I know.
I couldn't even start again. Same era of, he's sort of defined rock and roll with all the bands he's been in, and I think I picked that particular song, if I'm not mistaken, was Hellraiser.
Yeah.
Because it was a cover of a Motorhead song called Hellraiser, which I think they recently re-released using Lemmy's vocals and Ozzie's vocals together.
Oh, I haven't heard it. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, it's cool. But Motorhead was a band that I think I almost put on this list, and I think I went with an homage to them with Ozzie, because they were great friends. Lemmy's a class act rock and roller, and Ozzie as well, as you know, had a phenomenal history. I had the pleasure of hanging out with Zach Wilde actually in LA a couple years ago now, and again, a phenomenal human being. You know, someone who's genuinely authentic, a phenomenal guitar player, and it was really, really exciting to me to think that, like, this man helped write and perform some of the iconic Ozzie tracks, modern Ozzie tracks of, you know, our life. And apart from the fact that he is a very intimidating human being, he looks like a Viking, and it's not a stage get up. He genuinely looks like that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wonder how big
it's
his
really cool
groupies are.
because weirdly enough, this event we were at was it was a private event, but I think because there were so many folks there weren't a lot of groupies, and it was pretty tame. I thought it was weird, you know, I'm standing in a group with like Mike Portnoy, DJ Ashba, Zach Wild, and I'm looking around and it's like just us and there's no one else there. It's like,
It seems weird.
This is yes, this is unusual, but it was a cool experience. And again, I think when it comes down to these people being authentic people, that's always what sort of locks me into them and going, wow, okay. Now, they say don't meet your heroes, but I think they're talking about pop stars and politicians, not rock and rollers.
Yeah, I agree. Because you already know, if you've seen them on stage, you've seen them do stupid stuff, you write about stuff, you still want to meet them, then just go meet them. Nothing's going to shock you. So do you have any song in your library that you'd be embarrassed to tell somebody that you like?
Oh, no. I'm an open book as far as that. I think I just like good music.
Yeah.
And the catchy hook. Doesn't matter if it's pop music, doesn't matter. A country rubs me the wrong way a little bit, the modern pop country world, but you know, even that genre not being my favorite, I still absolutely love like Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson. You just, they're phenomenal musicians. The songs are great. And you know, that's always how I viewed things. It's art, right? Doesn't matter what you're listening to as long as it's good, and it's all subjective anyway. So what you and I like might not be what someone else likes. I mean, hip hop's huge now. Some might say it's as big or bigger than rock and roll was in the 80s, but might not necessarily be my genre or what I like. But you can't write it off entirely just because you don't dig it. I think there's a lot of phenomenal hip hop artists out there, and you know, even the campy made for radio pop stuff like the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, they still had their merits. They still had great harmonies, and anyone who's written music knows exactly how tough it is to write a pop song. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of talent that goes, even if you don't like that particular artist, there's a lot of talent that goes into producing that kind of stuff. So no, I don't really have anything that I would be embarrassed about. Maybe like Baby Shark.
All right, next song, Red Flag.
The crutch that girls to play, the red flag women in the lip that say, the kids of tomorrow don't need today when they live in the sins of yesterday.
Red Flag, right? Billy Talent. Great.
Yes. Toronto boys. They actually just put out an album, I think last week. It's great. Still in the strain of their classic stuff. Years ago now, I had the pleasure of hanging out with them at the Horseshoe Tavern on Queen Street in Toronto. And a friend of mine called me and was like, hey, go to the Horseshoe at like 4 p.m. Trust me. And didn't say anything else. I was like, all right. So down we go. And, you know, there's just a big security dude at the door, which is not unusual for Toronto clubs, but a little weird at like 4:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So I go in and there's a bunch of people setting up cameras and shit. And I kind of thought, oh, this is unusual. So we got in, and what had happened was Billy Talent was performing at one of the Indie Tuesday, like the Horseshoe does local artist curated nights, right? So every, say, Tuesday, they'll have a lineup of like local band.
Yeah.
And it's all the time. They a lot of hard work building the lineups to make them good, make sure the bands are talented. It's not just a bunch of hacks. But Billy Talent decided they wanted to play a secret show at the Horseshoe, which is a tiny venue, 100 people, and it's packed, right? And this was a band that had been touring stadiums. So you can imagine if anyone found out about it, it would have been anarchy.
Yeah.
There's about 100, maybe 120 of us in this room. and their album, I think it was Dead Silence, had just come out. I think that was the album. And
Wow.
yeah, it was probably one of the most intimate shows. But again, without all the stage production, without all the big effects and things that come with stadium concert performances, it was just vocals, drums, guitar, and bass, and they killed it. And then afterwards, we were just hanging out in the side stage and got to chat to the guys. They gave me a signed set list, which was phenomenal. And
That's cool.
again, I think it boils down to just being authentic musicians. They were born in our Toronto, Mississauga area. They've been playing in bands since they were all teenagers, and that was kind of their way of giving back to their little local community of,
I love it.
we've toured the world and played all these huge rock fests, but we're just going to play a little tiny small town club show. And yeah, it was great. So obviously couldn't omit them from the list.
So you do a podcast too. Is this on a regular basis? The 100, I can do whatever I want. So where did that?
Yeah, I have $100.
Yeah. So where
That's
did
a
this
good
come
question.
from?
I think some friends and I had this idea of doing a show for a while. We'd all done different stuff at different times. Mostly it was commercial content, so it was related to some kind of product or service. And the problem when you work for a company and do media or do any kind of content, you always have to adhere to their rules, their HR guidelines. You can't talk about anything uncouth, and it's stifling at times, because my sense of humor and the sense of humor of people I know, it's pretty twisted. And we needed a platform to be able to, we'd come up with all these funny scenarios and all this great content that we could never use for all of our other endeavors, right? If you're promoting a Taylor guitar or a Fender guitar, you're talking about any company-based media, you can't really get into it too much. And you're always shilling product, and it's always sponsored, so it's just different. So we figured, let's start our own show where we wanted full control over the content. We had this production company that agreed, basically gave us free reign. They'd seen us from other stuff and said, yeah, whatever you want to do it. We don't care, which was really refreshing. And we ended up picking up a sponsorship with a brewery up in Newmarket, Ontario called Market Brewing. And same thing, they said, we love you guys, we'll sponsor the show. So, a lot of free beer, which was definitely a highlight. And yeah, we were able to create exactly the show that we wanted. And we did a full season. We had season 2 lined up. It's still tentatively scheduled, but COVID's made it really tricky. A lot of the sort of production team and a lot of the facilities aren't available at this time. So I think we'd all decided that rather than do remote stuff, we'd rather do it in the room with our team the way that we intend, to make sure that the content is the best it could be. So I think right now we've just decided, what's the harm in waiting?
Well, I love I love it. Again. It's like super fun. And I love doing in-person music junkies. It's just different, right? We could have drinks and we can feed off each other. And so I think it's amazing that you guys are waiting to be able to do that. So
it's just something that makes sense to me. And in the style of that particular show, we really go off the rails a lot, but I think that's the magic of it. Is it's very human, and it's what makes it sort of work. I think we've done like some live stream events, and we've had like viewers tune in and watch it live, but I always kind of felt that it's never quite the same. It's okay for a fun little thing, but to do a season like that, I think it's just doing a disservice to the viewers.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I hope it comes back. Here's your next song.
Yeah.
Do it or die.
Die Mannequin. Yeah, they were the first larger band that I toured with back in
Okay.
2010, I think. Yeah. So Saint Yesterday, we got picked up on. I think at the time they were with Warner Music. We got picked up on their tour, and it was my first experience doing that type of show and having larger crowds that we didn't know. Right? We were able to do pretty good, and I think we sold out a few shows with just our following. But it's always different when there's strangers who don't know you, because you're now on the spot. You have to impress them.
Yeah.
People already know what to expect. It's easier, but it's always that I've said to a lot of my musician friends, it's never about impressing your own fans. It's always about impressing the people who've never heard you before. And the best way to do that is, like, if you go to an open mic at a bar, and there's just some drunk guy at the bar watching the game or something. If you can go up and you can perform your music in like an acoustic environment without all your fancy tools and toys, and you can pull the attention of that drunk guy away from his TV for a moment, then that is the mark of your talent. If you can, again, impress someone who doesn't know you, make sure that you're making yourself known. It's always the biggest challenge I think any musician has. But that was my first experience with that particular band, and I think they're still around. Care Failure, the singer, she's still around Toronto, and I don't know if they're performing anymore. They've done all kinds of crazy big tours. They've played with Marilyn Manson. They played with
Wow.
I think, I can't remember what tour they were on last, but just big stuff all over. And they were a female fronted band that I always really dug. So I'd like to see them do stuff again. I'm not sure what they're up to these days, but last time I spoke to Care was downtown in the city, and we actually worked out of the same studio for a while with Mike Turner from Our Lady Peace downtown. The studio's closed, as is a lot of stuff in Toronto, but yeah, it was a very small sort of local community. So I had to put them on the list. If you haven't heard of the band, definitely check them out.
Yeah, I'm gonna check them out. Well, I listened to your playlist and I really liked it. I love that. I liked it. It's like, oh, cool.
Mhm.
This is my favorite part of doing Music Junkies. Is obviously I don't know every single song, but I know a lot of music and I love pretty much everything. So I have my own little playlist that I just keep adding songs to after I have guests. I'm like, oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. And a lot of the stuff I haven't heard. Some people, I have this guest that I'm doing next week. He had Dead Kennedys on there. I don't remember the last time I listened to Dead Kennedys. I was like, oh my God, I must have been in grade 6 or 7 when I, one of my best friend's brother loved, Dead Kennedys. And like I was just like, oh my God, I cannot believe it. So it was so crazy even to go back and think of that. All right, your last song, Jack.
Oh, there we are.
I love it. What a way to end. That's your song, Falling.
That is a very familiar tune. Yeah. We put that out a few years ago now, I think. It was one of the first singles we released with Dan and Felix in the band. It's kind of the culmination, I think, of the playlist, because it was what took all of those other songs and influences from them and sort of created its own thing. I mean, that's how music works, right? You listen to things, it enters your ears, gets jumbled around in your head, and then you regurgitate something that's similar but always you. It's uniquely flavored. That's any artist's job, is to take your influences and create something that's you. And that was a good example of kind of how that evolves. So Falling, it's also the first single that was put out where we had switched studios. So previously we were working with this studio in Brecon, Ontario, which is way up in the middle of nowhere. And we were working with my friend Taylor Abram, who now is in the James Barker band. So Taylor used to track all the stuff with us at this tiny little studio, but we decided we wanted to sort of up the production a bit, make it a little more exciting and theatrical. So we switched studios to the Pocket downtown Toronto with Mike Turner, who was the guitar player for Our Lady Peace. That was his studio. So we started working there with our producer, Chris Perry, who also produces a ton of bands, but co-manages Courage My Love, which is another great female-fronted band. So it was a new recording experience for us and a new space, like new lineup, new gear. It was a really refreshing thing to be able to jump into. And I think that's important for any artist, right?
Yeah, I do.
Don't get stale, and boring. Like, expand your horizons. So that song will be on the album that hopefully will come out next year. We'll see. It's, I don't know, 75, 80% done. It's currently sitting in limbo as it's been for the last 2 years because there's nowhere to record.
Yeah.
Crazy. And also the slowdown of every industry, especially vinyl. So if you want to have vinyl pressed, you're going to be waiting 8-9 months. It's crazy.
That's insane.
I figured our fans, they don't care. They'll wait. They waited a decade. They'll wait for another decade if they need to. And we don't create music for profit, really. I don't think any musician who got into music for profit is doing very successfully.
Yeah.
We create music because we want to. And if people enjoy it and they gravitate to it and it connects with them, awesome. But for me, at least, it's always just a matter of a need to create. So whatever time that takes, it takes. There's no label pressure. St. Yesterday is independent. So for us, it's on our own terms. It's financed entirely by us as well, which is always challenging, but we're very careful. So any money we make always gets put back into the band to be able to sustain itself. And that's why the band has been able to be around for, a decade and change. A lot of bands start strong, hemorrhage a ton of money for a year or two, and then break up because they're broke. So it's a fine line that you got to walk. But yeah, I'm hoping next year we'll have the debut album out.
Well, you have to keep me posted
for band. Yeah,
definitely keep me posted. So I want to ask you, what are some words of wisdom with everything that you've kind of been through in your life, just with somebody listening, you would like to leave?
Even if they're free, be cautious with the amount of drugs you consume, because ultimately, if it's something that's got a long duration, you might have fun for a couple hours, but if you still have like 6 or 7 hours left of that trip, you're going to have a bad time, right?
I agree.
I think that's probably the only advice I can impart.
Just take half.
I'm sure, practical.
Just take half.
Tons of practical advice, but
yeah, I love it.
That's something near and dear to my heart.
I love it. So Jack, where can we find you? Social media? I just want you to be able to just kind of share with us where we can find you, your albums, anything that you want to share that, people listening can go look out.
Yeah. Right now, if you go on to, I think pretty well anything, the Jack Panic is my handle on pretty well the internet. And SXY Band will be my St. Yesterday band with Dan and Felix everywhere else. So pretty easy to find. And if those don't work for you and you're more of a human being type physical person, once the bars open here in Ontario again, probably any number of local dive punky bars in Toronto, you can see me floating around. So if you just wander around enough, I'm sure you'll spot me.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jack, for being on the show today. It was super fun. It was great just getting to know you, obviously, going through your playlist and then just seeing how much of a wonderful human you are. So I appreciate your time.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you having the show, and we'll definitely touch.